Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our session is called Educators as Learners and Active Designers of Equity, using student voices to unpack structural, instructional, and curricular inequities in schools. So here's who we are, presenters and panelists. So my name is Ryoko Yamaguchi, and with me as part of the research team is Adam Hall. And then we've got, as teacher panelists, we've got Michael Griffin, who's an English learner coordinator at Wakefield High School, Anthony McPhee, a math teacher at Langston High School, Christina Eagle, special education coordinator at Career Center, and Wanda McPhee, a math teacher at Wakefield High School. So we really have a good representation of a lot of teachers and their roles across all the high school programs in Arlington Public School in Virginia. So the goals for today's session is three main things. First, we're going to reflect on what constitutes a good school by focusing on educator outcomes rather than student outcomes. We're going to learn about structural, instructional, and curricular barriers that diverse students face via student empathy interviews. And this is really at the heart of our conceptual framework for this project. And then you'll get to listen to how educators have actively designed for equity through an equity-focused continuous improvement process. So of course, let me first thank National Science Foundation for supporting this work. So let's go on to the definition of educational equity and really unlearning how we define good schools. So here is an example of a really typical high school ranking. So this is a 2020 ranking from the US News and World Report, but you've seen rankings from niche.com, Jay Matthews with the Washington Post. But this is a national ranking of high schools. And you'll notice that we've got 100% graduation, right, from these schools. There's a college index, college readiness index, and they're all 100%, 100. And just for kicks, they'll show you the enrollment or the school size of these high schools. And let's do a pause and reflect here. How do these school rankings define best schools? So for the folks watching, go ahead and pause the video, and we'll see you back in about 10 seconds. Welcome back. So let me show you how the rankings are based according to this ranking from the US News and World Report. So according to their methodology, it's actually all about students. So let me cut to the chase. So the college readiness score for 30%, it's really the 12th graders who took and passed at least one AP or IB class or exam. It's math and reading proficiency for underserved students, and the graduation rate. So it's all about students and student outcomes at that. Let me show you how diverse students define best schools. So here's some quotes from empathy interviews from students. And one of my favorite quotes is in the middle one. You can see it in her voice. You can tell she wants all of us to pass her class. The other quotes are also similar, where it's about the teachers, it's about the educators. That's what makes the best schools for these diverse students. And so educational equity, it's about the grown-ups in the system. An equitable education system is one in which educators support every student to actualize their full potential. Now, I used to say all students, and I've recently changed it to every student, because one of the things I realized was when we say all students, like the US News and World Report, all students graduated, right? All students are 100 in the college readiness index. When you switch our focus to every student, it's every student actually has their unique needs as well. Whether you're an A student or an F student, every student can actualize their full potential. And so let's look at educators as learners and active designers of equity with what we mean by structural, instructional, and curricular barriers. So here's our theoretical framework. So the equity mindset So it's a primary color. Imagine it as a primary color. I'm using blue because blue is my favorite color. And that blue is an undertone that infuses everything we do. And so there's three main areas we've been looking at: structural supports, instructional supports, and curricular supports. So structural aspects of schooling, it's how we do school. It's the policies, programs, and procedures. And the things that we've been drilling into with our RPP is grading policies, for example. Instructional aspects of schooling, it's the educator intent and actions for equity to support students to go through the learning pit, which the learning pit is something that Nottingham talked about. And an example of that is formative assessments. Curricular aspects of schooling. So this one's really important because it's not just about representation and multicultural education and showing diverse voices. It's about the content and activities that fully engage the content. And so what we've been looking at also are lesson plans. And here's our logic model or conceptual framework. So we're going to start with a backwards design of looking at impact. So that's going to be the right-hand corner. So for this work, we've been focusing on broadening participation of culturally and linguistically diverse students in STEM plus computer science in CS. To do that, we of course need student outcomes, right? Student access and opportunities and student performance. To have students perform and have access and opportunity, we need to develop students' independent learning behaviors. So that's the cognitive, academic, social, emotional development. Who does that? That's the educators, that's us, that's the grown-ups in the system. So the short-term educator outcomes, that's what defines a good school. That's effective school collaboration and practices and effective classroom practices. So the black box of a great school, it's when every single administrator, teacher, counselor, right, anyone in school, the grown-ups in the system, we're all learners and active designers of equity in these three main areas: structural supports to schooling, about the structures of teaching, structures of learning, instructional supports. There's two main things. It's culturally responsive pedagogy, how we teach, but it's also culturally responsive practices, how we connect authentically with students, each and individual students, and curricular supports for schooling. So that's inculcating social emotional learning across content areas, as well as critical thinking, computational thinking, problem solving in content areas as well. So it shouldn't be a separate unit, right? Something that for 5 minutes a counselor talks about with social emotional learning. The idea is those should be inculcated within curricular materials. Now the ingredients to do those things, that's the inputs, that's the left-hand side. And notice that it has nothing to do with students. So if you remember the US News and World Report, the top schools, there's an entry criteria. Right? There's like test scores and applications and this and that, all about students. Those are the inputs. For us, a great school, the inputs are about, again, the grown-ups in the system. The way we've been doing the process of having the educators as learners concept is design thinking plus equity, which is the liberatory design that Stanford's D School has been doing, great stuff, plus the continuous improvement cycle. So all that together is part of the adaptive implementation process that we've been doing. And so here's the adaptive implementation process of digging out barriers and planting supports. So let's go to identifying barriers through student empathy interviews. So just like in many school districts across the country, Arlington Public Schools also put out a report about the first quarter grades for the district. And this is the district-wide high school students' first quarter grade distribution. So the right-hand side is this year during virtual school. The left-hand columns are the ones from last year and then 2 years ago. And you'll see with all students, there's actually a slight increase in A's. And of course, there's a slight increase in F's. So in Arlington, it's called an E. So you'll see at the bottom, but those are F's. Now we're looking at the district-wide Black high school students with the first quarter grade distribution. Again, an increase in A's for the quarter during virtual school. But you'll also see an increase in F's. Here's the district-wide Hispanic high school students' first quarter grade distribution. There's not a lot of increase in A's, but look at the increase in the number of F's. It almost doubled from last year. Now, these are numbers. Let's put a student to one of these numbers. So this is Amy. Now, Amy is a real student in Arlington Public School, but Amy is a pseudonym. So we're gonna listen to Amy's story. So she is a sophomore in one of the very diverse high schools that we have here in Arlington. But she is one of the few students of color in her math class. So the school year starts and she's getting an 80%, so she's getting a B, but Amy contacts the counselor for supports in math. But the counselor tells her, you're doing fine, you don't need supports. Now Amy says, my friend, who also was one of the few students of color in the class, her friend dropped the class after her counselor told her that it would take too long to arrange tutoring, and by the time they did, her grade would be too low to help, and told her to drop out. So this friend dropped out of this class. Now for Amy, it gave me the impression that they wanted students to fail. It was like, no one can help you, so you just have to drop out. So it's like letting us fail. Now, for any high school teacher out there, you know when a student actually approaches you for help, you want to help them out. So sure enough, Amy was right. As the weeks went by, her grade started to drop. The student continued to ask the counselor for supports in math. And guess what happened? The same thing that her friend had, where she was told she should drop out of class. Now, the math teacher, in the meantime, places a student on a list to receive peer tutoring. And by the end of the first semester, which is in January, she's getting an F. So the student continues to go to office hours for her math class. And Amy says, the teacher would say, if you aren't taking these opportunities, meaning office hours, then you are basically letting yourself down. I am not going to let them say that about me, so I'm going to office hours and ask for help. But even when I did, it was not helpful enough. So let's have another pause and reflect. So reflect on the structural, instructional, and curricular barriers that Amy faced in her schooling. So give yourself about a minute to reflect, and we'll be here when you get back from the pause and reflection. Welcome back. So now I'm going to stop sharing the slides and we're going to hear the educator panel discussion. And Adam will facilitate that conversation.
All right, thank you, Ryoko. Okay, I just want to remind folks we do have with us Wanda McPhee, a math educator, Christina Eagle, a special education educator, Anthony McPhee, also a math educator, and Michael Griffin, an English learner educator, all from Arlington Public Schools. Thank you all for joining us. If we could, and I'm just going to kind of pass this around the room if you don't mind, we've got about 10 minutes. Let's just discuss the ways in which you all have been changing the structure and approaches that you use with students to better engage and understand their needs, and how to improve the quality of the educational experience that you all provide to your students, especially your girls of color. So let's talk a bit about how you've been changing the structure and the approaches that you use with your students. Ms. McPhee, would you like to go first by chance? Absolutely. Well, thank you, Adam. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I've implemented is I realized that students learn at different pace. And so for that purpose, years ago, in my younger years of teaching, I would say, okay, I had afternoon classes, I reviewed with you, you had to take your test. The grade you got was the grade you got. Over the years, my philosophy and my thinking began to change because I realized that students learn at different pace. And I should not penalize a student if it takes them a little bit longer to grasp a concept. And so once I time that hit me, then I began to provide opportunities for students to relearn, reteach the concept to them, and give them an opportunity to now show mastery of the concept that I wanted them to get, that I wanted to get across to them.
Great, thank you for that. All right, Christina, could you kind of share some of your strategies as well?
Sure. So working with I support a special education program. And one of the things that we have focused on during this challenging time during the pandemic is setting up actually community meetings with students and parents together, in which we talk about our curriculum, what we are teaching, the obstacles that we have faced together, and we talk about our plan. And we have an open door policy with our families, and that has brought a lot of communication about what the students are facing, what the parents are facing, and how we can support each other during this time. And I think that we have really learned each other's perspectives, and that has brought a better understanding of how we can provide supports in the home, provide better instruction in the classroom, and really meet the needs of our families and our students.
If I can just say this, it sounds like both you and Ms. McPhee have been working a great deal on understanding the context that your students are facing in relation to your classrooms and the learning that's taking place there. So that's wonderful. Mr. McPhee, please, could we hear from you as well? Some of the, how you've been changing some of the structures and approaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I've done is, look at the student and ask myself, okay, why is the student not getting it? When I look at a particular problem, I look at it as, okay, does the student have all the tools necessary to comprehend the problem and then go ahead and solve the problem? So that's one of the things that we have done here at Langston. It's sort of like a switchblade approach. Does the student have everything they need? Going through it methodically as to, okay, why is the student not getting it? And then supporting the student in terms of, okay, well, from my perspective, I think this is what you need in solving the problem and moving ahead.
Excellent, thank you. All right, and Mr. Griffin.
Working with English learners, one of the approaches we've done this year, I work on a team or with a group of educators where we've in the past done a project called a senior project or senior experience. And what we've done is we took the initiative to have more regular meetings or check-in as a team. And we looked at the way our assessment process and the way we assess the student success or grading process for a year-long activity. It lasts us 1 year. And one thing we did was we made a change. Normally students have to do a presentation as well as an essay. That's normally from 6 to 12 pages, a research type based essay. This year, what we did, we made a change because of the virtual window of learning and accessibility is we adapted it where students have an option. We gave the student option. So we empowered the students by allowing them to either do a presentation only, still doing the research, but to do a presentation only among some of their peers and a couple of staff members, or they could choose to do an essay only as their final product, or they could do the combination of both the essay and the presentation, which we've done in the past. And so we've had to do that and make some adjustment on the grading process and also implement where the check-ins and certain requirements were different as far as them keeping their journal records. There were a lot of more emphasis on weekly journals and the amount of hours that they had to obtain. But now they've been empowered and have been given more autonomy. So it's just making adjustments, adaptability as was stated earlier in the presentation, and being a member of that black box, we want to make sure we empower our students.
Excellent, excellent. And if I could just kind of encapsulate that as well, we heard from Mrs. McPhee and Christine Eagle as well regarding the fact they work with context with their students and their families. Mr. McPhee, you spoke to the resources to make sure the students have those things that they need to ensure or help build that success. And then Mr. Griffin, you've also spoken to the grading policies and the structure of those assignments that you all have changed and allowed to be flexible to ensure those students' success and allow them to kind of shine and showcase what they have learned. These are some great examples of how you all have changed the structure and used different approaches to help your students as they've worked through that learning pit that Ryoko was talking about earlier. Are there any additional comments that any of you would like to make? This was wonderful. I thank you for your feedback. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Any thoughts also on the story of Amy? Because again, this is a real student in one of our high schools.
Mm-hmm.
Well, given
Ms. McPhee?
I was going to say, in addition to allowing the students to master the content and not really putting a time frame on them, also not penalizing the student if they have missing assignments, giving them, working with them, because sometimes, especially being in this virtual environment, students can tend to get overwhelmed if they aren't keeping up to pace with the class. And then some students wouldn't ask for help. And when you anticipate that they need that help and they are so far behind, what do? Do you say, okay, you have to complete this, 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 and this? Or do you say, okay, I will work with you, let's adapt what we can do so that you can be successful? Because at the end of the day, what's the goal? The goal is to make sure that the child understands, that they can master the content so that they can be successful and be able to move on to the next level. Right? And so you want to provide those support and do it early. And so another thing that I've done this year that I haven't done before in this virtual environment is had one-on-one interviews with students. And that is helpful. When we have class, most of the students don't turn on their cameras, but when we have a one-on-one interview, I'm able to see them. And it's such a delight to see their faces and have a dialogue with them. How can I help? What can I do? Okay, I understand that your mom or your dad isn't doing well. Okay, no problem. I will put up this assignment. You let me know when you are in the mental space so that we can get together and we can set a time frame so that we can work. And just making sure that the child's needs are being met.
Absolutely, absolutely, excellent.
And along those lines that Ms. McPhee mentioned, I too had to change because it's about creating small wins for the student, because it's about having their confidence, because it's more about confidence in moving forward. And if we could help the student to have small wins, it was said, one small step for man, but one giant step for mankind. And that's referring to men going to the moon. But what was those steps before getting to the moon? How many of those small steps it took for that spaceship to, just to jettison into space? So I look at my student and I said, okay, what do we need? What kind of small steps we need to make, to make an improvement to go towards our goal? And based upon the student, based upon the problem, based upon the environment, create, me as a teacher, create those small steps, whether it is, okay, well, let me move my office hours, not being so rigid. I gotta, if you don't find me at 12 to 1, then, you're not gonna find me. Well, could I move my office hours from 2 to 3? Or, go out of my way as the student have access to their computer, or, stuff like that, some small wins, so that the student can be successful, so that they can have that confidence, so they can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Mr. Griffin, I know we'll let you close things out for us. You were mentioning, I think you had a comment as well. I'm going to give you a moment.
Yes, what I noticed about the student that was identified by Ryoka was the grades. Mm-hmm. Grades can be very deceptive, meaning that the student started off at 80%. Mm-hmm. And for most individuals, that's here in Arlington, that would be a B. So, when the student showed a concern and expressed a concern, there was like, well, you're doing great. but it's important to hear the student voices. It's important that when a student voices a concern, although the situation may appear to look successful, it's important to do like Mrs. McPhee and Mr. McPhee identified, was to create win situations for that student. Empower that student that after you talk or have a discussion as a member of that black box, or a member of that support for instructional or curriculum or structural support, whatever we can do to make a change. But I noticed each one of those has the word support. So look at how we can meet with that student individual. It's important for me to do that as an English learner educator, and to determine, look at the resources and talk with the student on what that student feel that could empower them, or to complete that feeling within them of continued success, not just for today, that 80%, but down the road, a quarter or two later. So that's basically what I identified in that picture.
Can I add one thing? One of the things that I was thinking about is also thinking about the long-term skills that students need to be successful, right? It's that resilience and that resourcefulness of knowing who to go to for help, and continuing even after you sort of received a no, to keep going back, right? And I think what for this young lady, what a missed opportunity to reinforce those skills that we want to see them utilize in the post-secondary world, to reinforce that thank you for coming to me and asking for help, and this is what I can provide you. And I think that's really, those skills are really markers of success down the road. So we also have to honor that skill by reinforcing and giving students what they're asking for, because that's what we're looking for in life, not just this class, but in every class or in every job or task that they're given in their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, let me say thank you to you all. This was great feedback and great comments. I'll hand this back to Ryoko, and we can get back into the presentation, and we'll come back together as a panel in a moment.
Fantastic. So now let's look at equity. Let's look at Amy on equity. So Amy finally got peer tutoring, but there was a delay in getting the peer tutoring because, again, the teacher put her on the list from November and it took 2 months. So according to Amy, their excuse was that my mom wasn't signing the permission slip, but they didn't even send it until much later. And finally, at the end of the quarter, where she's getting an F, she got a peer tutor, and and when she was assigned the peer tutor, Amy says, I was really afraid that I would get a white peer tutor because I thought I would just have to say, yeah, I understand, even though I didn't. I feel tense when I'm with someone who doesn't understand why I'm struggling. It's the lack of connection and then thinking that I'm lazy. And this is so important. First, with the understanding why I'm struggling. Not that she's struggling, it's why I'm struggling, and then that connection. Now here's Amy on equity. So she received 3 sessions with a peers tutor, and now she's getting an A, and the A is a 98%. Here's what happened with Designed for Equity. First, with the structural barriers to supports. So this wasn't rocket science. The peer tutor just asked, get your formula guide out. And Amy said, what formula guide? So it turns out a structural barrier was Amy didn't have the textbook or formula guide. Amy also did say that when picking things up from school, she had 2 choices. The mom would have to miss work, or Amy would have to miss school just to go to school that's only open from 8 to 4 p.m. And so the choice was her mom had to miss time off of work so that they can go to the school. to get anything. And so what happened was, so here's the dig out the barrier, plant supports for structural barriers to supports. So the peer tutor ended up getting her math teacher, not Amy's teacher, but her math teacher hand delivered the formula guide to Amy's residents within a week. Curricular barriers to supports. So the barrier, of course, is that there's just worksheets, right? Like any math class, we all know these worksheets, but if you don't have the formula guide, it's really hard to access and engage in the worksheets. So the peer tutor, she adapted the worksheets to deconstruct the equations into chunks and mini steps. Instructional barriers to supports. Now remember, Amy kept going to office hours for help and asking for help, and she's saying it wasn't enough. The peer tutor provided immediate feedback and explicit instructions on metacognitive strategies. So really similar to the conversations we've just heard with our educators, it's asking also which part of the mini steps, this is the part that was confusing, make sure you ask the teacher. Here's why it could have been confusing, but here's the way you do it. It's these mini chunks and providing metacognitive strategies. And then the peer tutor used the Zoom whiteboard for shared notes, printed it out, or exported it in a PDF so that Amy always had it as part of her curricular materials as well. Mm-hmm. And here's what Amy says after that. I was able to fill in the gaps of my knowledge that I was not able to get in class. Once I was able to fill in the gaps, everything fit together like a puzzle. Before, I felt like I was drowning underwater. Now I feel like I'm floating on the top with a little wave. I'm literally doing better in math class now than in any other class because of the assistance I get. Now, the math teachers in the room as well, you know how math works. It is like a puzzle. And once you get the pieces, it fits together. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides again so that we can hand it over to you guys with Adam facilitating on your showcase also.
Thank you again, Ryoko. Okay, thank you guys again. So the question we're going to kind of think about here is, how have you all collected data via the empathy interviews and even other methods to better understand and improve equity in your classrooms? And I'd really like to kind of lean in on that point regarding what types of data that you've collected or you're using to help make those decisions regarding making sure that your classroom is more equitable. So I'll just kind of throw that out there, and feel free to start us off, Ms. Eagle.
So I think the beautiful thing about special education is that it lends itself to the empathy interview. And I think really looking at each student and looking at their strengths, what their areas of growth are, and getting a full picture of who they are, what they need, and how can we support them. So I think in those conversations, it's been really, at those meetings, it's been really helpful to really engage with families and students and let them hear from you. From them, and then relaying that to the entire team. One of the things that I think we have focused on a lot this year is really putting the student at the center of that, letting them have autonomy in their planning process. Our students create a PowerPoint presentation about themselves, and they present it at their meetings. And also they use, sometimes if they're not feeling like they can give that presentation to some of their gen ed teachers, they will print it out and give it to them. Or and then we talk as a team about the strengths that they have, and we start from a place of where they can. And I think that is it's so much better to start from a area of what you can do versus starting from a feeling of that you're underwater. So I think that the beauty of the empathy interviews is that you're really understanding the perspective of the student, and finding a place to start from of where their strengths are and moving forward.
You're getting away from that deficit mindset and really thinking about students as whole individuals who have strengths. That's excellent. That's excellent. All right, I'll leave the floor open. Who would like to go next?
As I'll go next. You know, just talking with the students, I was speaking with a student. In fact, just today, I was speaking with a student and I was questioning. I noticed with the word problems and trigonometry we were doing, I noticed you didn't do anything on your slides. Can you tell me why you didn't do that? And the student was able to say, you know, to be honest with you, I can only stay focused for a short period of time. After 10 minutes or so, I kind of lose focus. And so I was able to make some suggestions. Well, maybe get a cup of water and have it there with you. Maybe get some mints. Maybe just get up and do a push-up or do a jumping jack and then sit back down so you can get a mind, so your mind can get a little break and then you can kind of re-engage. Right? Because we are in this learning environment, we are in this virtual environment, and students do have different learning styles, right? And so we want to know that even, you know, those ones who feel like their attention span is just a little bit shorter, just take a break, you know, use the bathroom, get some water, do a jumping jack, do whatever you need to do so you can kind of refocus yourself and then just get back into the swing of things. But being also there to listen to them and hear them out. I had a student said, you know, my father had a stroke. So I said, okay, no worries. Listen, you take care of you mentally, and don't worry about doing this assignment right now. When you feel like you are in the mental space, then we can meet, we can set up a time. If not office hours, I can meet with you after school. We can meet even on a Saturday or a Sunday. If you have an extra time there, I can meet with you. Just being flexible, as Mr. McPhee said earlier, being flexible and letting them know that, listen, I really do care about you. I want the best for you, but I also understand that life happens. And right now, this is what's going on in your life. And I'm willing to say, I'm going to put my work aside for right now until you are in a position where you can be able to access the information. Because with you being stressed and worried about your father, it doesn't matter how much teaching I'm doing, it's going over your head in any event. Right? And so not putting in that 0 in the grade book, but just being compassionate and having empathy for the child.
Mm-hmm. And that's what empathy interviews are all about too.
That's
it's
right.
in the name, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and let me piggyback on that because, you know, like Ms. McPhee said, you know, we've never done this before, virtual learning. What I mean, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, if somebody said virtual learning, what is that? You know, and also then we're in this pandemic, so we have to adapt to whatever the student needs are, you know, and make ourselves available for the students. And then, you know, like I mentioned, we have never done this before. Give them grace. You know, grace is so wonderful. Grace is, you know, they don't deserve it, but let's give them a pass, you know, because there's so many things that might be happening outside of school. You know, at our school, a lot of our students work. It's a continuing education program, so the kids can get their degree. But these kids, the kids that I teach, they're working. So one of the great things on their mind is, okay, I need to go to work to get the rent, to pay the bills, you know, to make ends meet, or they might be supporting another sibling, you know. So there's a lot of things happening, and we have to be cognizant of that, and then, you know, give them grace. And so one of the things that, you know, the data that I've changed is that, okay, my due dates, my due dates are way past any particular, you know, like rigid. In other words, I stopped being so rigid and have my due dates way out there, so that, you know, the students can say, okay, well, I don't have to do that until, you know, X, Y, and Z. So that's one of the things that, you know, I've also implemented in this particular environment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'd like to say that I agree to chime in with Mr. McPhee, to give them grace or to be empathetic, because a lot of the students, not only do they have jobs, you know, I deal with English learners, these students also have siblings in the house. And one thing I noticed and I learned through these empathy interviews is to, when we meet with the students, because I meet with the students with another teacher, we do breakout sessions, it's good to have open-ended questions. And that's one thing I learned about the empathy interview, because you don't learn as much about a student when it's a closed-ended question or self-directed question. But when it's a open-ended question, and that's what I've noticed with the empathy interviews, students talk about things outside of the academic world. You know, they talk about challenges at home, like Mrs. McPhee identified, or you know, they talk about things that are outside, dealing with their jobs, things that affect their environment outside of the school structure. So that in itself is helpful to me as an educator, and helping me to understand why the student isn't turning in an assignment or what that student is in need of at that time. So for me, the data I've been able to collect is to be aware of the challenges that students face even more because of the virtual accessibility, because of just the things of life that many times I may have overlooked when students come into the building. So the empathy interviews have really empowered me to be more conscious of those structural barriers as well.
I have to say, I hope that some of this learning that we've all made in this virtual setting carries forward. You know, that's one of the hopes that I do have, that we continue to recognize that with our students as we move forward in time, and hopefully get away from the virtual model and go back to some sort of normal, as we might call it. Let's hope that that kind of thinking spreads and carries forward. So thank you all for that. You've provided some amazing comments here and some great feedback. And I just want to say now on the video as well, that we will have office hours on April 23rd, and this is for the audience out there. On April 23rd, we're hoping sometime between 3 and 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll have a definite time posted on the Carnegie website, but we'll have office hours, and hopefully we can hear more from you all. It's been a pleasure to work with you all and hear your voices here. And with that, I would like to throw it back to Ryoko, and thank you all for your comments again. Thank you.
Great. And then I also want to highlight a lot of the things that you guys were saying also is it's moving away from the compliance culture that we tend to have in schooling, right? Like the rigidity of the once and done. Like life isn't about once and done with either a test or an essay or this and that, right? So the rigidity that was before with the compliance culture, through the empathy interviews, connecting authentically with students, it's being able to make those adjustments. Like, you know, Wanda, you're really saying, you've done home visits virtually with your one-on-one interviews. So a lot of the adaptivity that you guys have done, as like Michael, you were saying, with the black box of what makes a good school, a lot of it is moving towards more adapting things for your students, not expecting the students to adjust to your lunch hour kind of idea. So now we're moving to the wrap up. So with that, key takeaways. So again, I wanted to highlight educational equity. It's about the grown-ups in the system. It's about educators moving towards adaptability, moving towards making authentic partnerships like we've heard today. It's turning numbers into students. So any number is a mirror. That's all it is. And unfortunately, it's also a rear view mirror, right? But the empathy interviews, it allows for us to better identify and understand barriers so that we can adjust. And we're going to just dig out the inequity. We don't need to transform it. We don't need to buy more programs for it. We're just going to dig it out. And we're going to plant structural, instructional, and curricular supports for equity. And again, come to our office hours. We'll have all of our educators here also during our office hours. And your time is so valuable. Thank you so much for your time in watching our show. And it's like little gifts for us. So thank you for your time. And then help us improve with Carnegie. Here's information for the assessment for today's show. Thank you again. Bye-bye.